Had the 16th and 17th century reformers who recognized the papacy as the Antichrist lived just a few centuries later, they would also have been privy to certain historical events that signally fulfilled the prophesied decline of its temporal dominion, the metaphorical deadly wound from which it would heal, that was prophesied in Revelation 13 verse 3. They would thereby have been able, as later Protestants were, to identify the true endpoint of the Antichrist's allotted 1,260-year epoch. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Over the course of time, it became discernible that this wound was gradually inflicted on the papacy through certain notable incidents in 1789, 1798 and 1866 that drastically diminished the temporal authority that it had lorded over the kingdoms of Europe in the Middle Ages. Protestants who lived during and after those events, recognizing their significance, looked backward 1,260 years to confirm the time frame during which the phasing in of that era of the first beast's supremacy had taken place. As expected, at around that point in the past, there was a corresponding cluster of remarkable events that took place within a similar span of decades, roughly 80 years, which signified the onset of a period of growth in the papacy's temporal power, in 529, 538 and 606 AD. A paragraph of background information is warranted here, to ensure that my readers will see the relevance of what follows. Justinian I, the emperor of the Byzantine, Eastern, Roman Empire, that remained after the Greater Empire had been divided between Eastern and Western, first promulgated the new Corpus Juris Civilis, i.e., body of civil law, commonly known as the Code of Justinian, in 529 AD. In 533, Justinian wrote a letter to the Bishop of Rome, John II, wherein he referred to the bishop as Your Holiness, who is the head of all the holy churches. The emperor's letter, along with the bishop's reply acknowledging that status, being later incorporated into the Code of Justinian, made the Roman Empire's recognition of the Roman bishopric's supreme authority within the Church a legally established reality. In 1793, James Bichonneau Sr., a Baptist minister from England, published his book entitled The Signs of the Times, or The Overthrow of the Papal Tyranny in France, the prelude of destruction to popery and despotism, but of peace to mankind, in which he called attention to the period from 529 AD, the year of Justinian's letter, to 1789, the start of the French Revolution. And in this very year 529, which we are looking for, the Justinian Code was first published, by which those powers, privileges and immunities were secured to the clergy, that union perfected between things civil and ecclesiastical, and those laws imposed on the Church, which have proved so injurious to Christianity, and so calamitous to mankind, and which code, through the zeal of the clergy, has been received, more or less, as the foundation of the jurisprudence of almost every state in Christendom, and that not only in things civil, but ecclesiastical, and by this means, as some author has observed, the old fancy of the Romans about the eternity of their command is thus far verified. Was not the time of the publishing of the forementioned Code of Justinian a period in the history of the apostasy in which we may suppose the Almighty, with distinguished propriety, to begin to reckon the 1,260 years of the beast's power and the treading down of the holy city? The conjecture is probable a priori, but, if present events, and these compared with other events, agree to recommend this date, 529, the probability is much increased. According to Revelation 11:2, the holy city is to be trodden under foot of the Gentiles 42 months, and in verse 3 the two witnesses are to prophesy 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth. Chapter 12 and 7, we have the same number, and in verse 14 we learn that the woman was to be nourished in the wilderness, for a time and times and half a time, chapter 13:5. Power is given unto the beast, the first beast remember, not the second, to continue 42 months. The same time, 1260 years, is intended by all these numbers. But how can we reconcile those three different numbers of Daniel, with the 7, 2 in Daniel and 5 in the Apocalypse, which agree? In the first place, let it be allowed that the predicted final overthrow of Antichrist began with the revolution in France in 1789, and then reckon thus. Daniel's time, times, and half a time, 1260 years, begin and end with the 5 numbers in the Apocalypse, and as they are 1260 years and supposed to end at the French Revolution, they must begin AD 529 and end in 1789. Bichonneau recognized that the issuance of Justinian's Code in the year 529 had ushered in the 1260 years of papal supremacy, and that the onset of the French Revolution in 1789 had marked the beginning of its end, although he was mistaken that the end he had in mind was the ultimate demise of the papacy. He seems to have leaned toward the misapprehension of Bishop Newton that the bishopric of Rome had already received its proverbial mortal wound by its humiliation in having been subjected to the civil authority of the Exarchate of Ravenna in 568. Nonetheless, Bichonneau's words still turned out to be prescient. It happened only a few years after he wrote them that Pope Pius VI was placed under military arrest in 1798 by the order of Napoleon Bonaparte and taken to France, where he was imprisoned and died the next year. Jesuit priest and philosopher Joseph Rickaby is quoted in the Sourcebook for Bible students as having described these developments. When, in 1797, Pope Pius VI fell grievously ill, Napoleon gave orders that in the event of his death no successor should be elected to his office, and that the papacy should be discontinued. But the Pope recovered. The peace was soon broken. Berthier entered Rome on the 10th of February, 1798, and proclaimed a republic. The aged pontiff refused to violate his oath by recognizing it, and was hurried from prison to prison in France. Broken with fatigue and sorrows, he died on the 19th of August, 1799, in the French fortress of Valence, aged 82 years. No wonder that half Europe thought Napoleon's veto would be obeyed, and that with the Pope the papacy was dead. The Modern Papacy, Reverend Joseph Rickaby, S.J., Jesuit Society, page 1, London, Catholic Truth Society. Anglican Reverend Arthur Robert Pennington, in Epochs of the Papacy from its rise to the death of Pope Pius IX in 1878, vividly described the incident of the Pope's arrest. One day the Pope was sitting on his throne in a chapel of the Vatican, surrounded by his cardinals who had assembled for the purpose of offering him their congratulations on his elevation to his high dignity. On a sudden, the shouts of an angry multitude penetrated to the conclave, intermingled with the strokes of axes and hammers on the doors. Very soon a band of soldiers burst into the hall, who tore away from his finger his pontifical ring, and hurried him off, a prisoner, through a hall, the walls of which were adorned with a fresco representing the armed satellites of the papacy, on St. Bartholomew's Day, as bathing their swords in the blood of unoffending women and helpless children. Thus it might seem as if he were to be reminded that the same God who visits the iniquities of the fathers upon the children unto the 3rd and 4th generation, had made him the victim of his retributive justice for a deed of atrocity which had long been crying aloud to him for vengeance. The Pope, after having been hurried away from his territory, and treated with every indignity, at length died at Valence in Dauphiny, in 1799. The Methodist theologian, Adam Clarke, in his commentary on Daniel 7 verse 25 published in 1843, described the incident in 1798 as having been a deadly wound to the papal power. Take note of his implication that it was the Jesuits who had since superficially healed it. If we knew precisely when the papal power began to exert itself in the anti-Christian way, then we could at once fix the time of its destruction. The end is probably not very distant. It has already been grievously shaken by the French. In 1798, the French Republican Army under General Berthier took possession of the city of Rome and entirely superseded the whole papal power. This was a deadly wound, though at present it appears to be healed, but it is but skinned over, and a dreadful cicatrice, scar, remains. The Jesuits, not Jesus, are now the Church's doctors. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. Counting backward 1,260 years from the Pope's incarceration in 1798 brings us to the year 538, the time of a second event that further served to establish the papacy's supremacy as well as to identify it as the final manifestation of the little horn described in Daniel 7 verse 8, 20 and 24. I considered the horns, and, behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And, behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. Or, in the Hebrew, cause to abase, humble, put down, subdue, as the verb, yahashpil, is the hiphil stem, which generally adds a meaning of, to cause, to a verb in the active voice, and could express any of these 4 basic meanings. The 3 kings mentioned in Daniel 7 verse 24 might be better understood as referring not to the same 3 horns as in Daniel 7 verse 8 and 7:20 that would be plucked up or fall before this little horn, but to the kingdoms of Germany, Britain, and France, because it was the kings of particularly these 3 countries, e.g., Henry IV and Frederick II of Germany, King John and King Henry II of England, King Philip IV of France, were notoriously humbled by the papacy while at the zenith of its temporal power. This might be understood as a later, complementary fulfillment from another angle. Methodist minister and later Millerite, Josiah Litch, reasoned that, after Emperor Justinian had formally acknowledged the Bishop of Rome as the head of all holy churches, the legitimacy of this could not truly be claimed throughout the Roman Empire until it could be enforced throughout it. But that this was not the case until the Roman bishop's religious authority was established within those of the Western Roman territories, in which there were also holy churches, still controlled by Gothic tribes who were Arian Christians. This elevated status of the Bishop of Rome over the other bishops in the empire was solidified in 538 when the last of those 3 kingdoms, the Ostrogoths, was conquered. Observe, first, there were to be 10 kings contemporaneously flourishing, before any of the number were plucked up, and, second, that 3 of the first 10 horns were to be plucked up by the roots, before the little horn's establishment. The kingdoms must then be the first 10 established in Western Rome. According to Marchiavel, the historian, History of Florence, Book 1, and Bishop Lloyd, an excellent chronologer, in Loth's Commentary on the Prophets, pages 381-2, and Dr. Hale's Analysis of Chronology, Volume 2b1, pages 536-8. The first 10 kingdoms were as follows. 1. The Huns in Hungary, AD 356. 2. The Ostrogoths in Mysia, AD 377. 3. The Visigoths in Pannonia, AD 378. 4. The Franks in France, AD 407. 5. The Vandals in Africa, AD 407. 6. The Sueves and Alans in Gascogne and Spain, AD 407. 7. The Burgundians in Burgundy, AD 407. 8. The Heruli and Rugi or Thuringi in Italy, AD 476. 9. The Saxons and Angles in Britain, AD 476. 10. The Lombards in Germany, AD 483. 3 of the first horns, or kingdoms, were to be plucked up by the roots before him. 1. In AD 493, 10 years from the time of the establishment of the last of the 10 kings, the Heruli in Rome and Italy were subverted by the Ostrogoths. 2. In 534, the Vandals, another of the 10 kingdoms, were conquered by the Greeks, for the purpose of establishing the supremacy of the Catholics. 3. In 538, in the month of March, the Greeks conquered the Ostrogoths in Rome and Italy, and opened the way for carrying into effect the decree of Justinian, constituting the Bishop of Rome head of all the churches, for the Ostrogoths were Arians, and bitter enemies of the Pope and the Catholic faith. Hence, while they held Rome, the decree could not be carried into effect. But when the same power that issued the decree conquered and possessed Rome, it could be established. As noted previously, 606 AD was the year that the Bishop of Rome was elevated to universal bishop by Roman Emperor Phocas and granted the exclusive right to the title of Pope. From that moment on, the office of the Roman Papacy formally affirmed itself as being of the character that Bishop Gregory the Great had declared only 15 years earlier: Antichrist. How the year 1866 was the antithesis of 606 AD, starting the downward stroke of the final blow to the temporal power of the papacy that would mark the end of its prophesied 1,260-year reign, was well summarized by Henry Grattan Guinness in his History Unveiling Prophecy. Reckoned in full solar years, 1,260 years from the decree of Phocas terminated in 1866–7. The years 1866 to 1870 witnessed the overthrow of Papal Austria by Protestant Prussia, the Spanish insurrection and deposition of the Queen, the Ecumenical Council at Rome, and declaration of papal infallibility, the overthrow of the imperial power of Papal France in its conflict with Prussia, and the rise of the Kingdom of United Italy and of the Protestant Empire of Germany. 34 years have now elapsed since the memorable year 1870, when the Pope of Rome was decreed infallible and lost the temporal sovereignty which he had held for more than 1,000 years. As there is not the slightest probability that United Italy will consent to give up its dearly won position and restore the secular dominion of the popes, we are warranted in considering the year 1870 as that which witnessed the end of papal temporal power. The period known as the Medieval Inquisition was by no means the start of executions of heretics by state authorities at the behest of the Roman Church in the 12th century. However, it is generally understood to have comprised the first formal movements of the papacy to systematically eradicate groups that it considered apostate or heretical, which included the Albigenses and the Waldenses, also called the Vallenses or Vaudois. It included both the Episcopal Inquisition and the Papal Inquisition. The former began with a decree of Pope Lucius III in 1184 and was carried out by bishops of dioceses, and the latter began with Pope Gregory IX's appointment of papal inquisitors in 1231. In his book entitled The Pope and the Council, written under the pseudonym of Janus, the esteemed Romanist historian Johannes Joseph Ignaz von Derlinger wrote the following about the principal aims of, and those responsible for, the Inquisition. A wholly new institution and mighty organization had been introduced to make the papal system irresistible, to impede any disclosure of its rotten foundations, and to bring the infallibility theory into full possession. It was the Inquisition. Through the influence of Gratian, who chiefly followed Ivo of Chartres, and through the legislation and unwearied activity of the popes and their legates since 1183, the view of the ancient church on the treatment of the heterodox had been for a long period completely superseded, and the principle made dominant that every departure from the teaching of the church, and every important opposition to any ecclesiastical ordinances, must be punished with death, and the most cruel of deaths, by fire. The earlier laws of the Roman emperors had distinguished between heresies, and only imposed severe penalties on some on account of their moral enormity, but this distinction was given up after the time of Lucius III, in 1184. Complete apostasy from the Christian faith, or a difference on some minor point, was all the same. Either was heresy, and to be punished with death. The Walden says, the poor men of Lyon, who at first did but claim the right of preaching, although laymen, and who with more gentle treatment would never have formed themselves into a hostile sect, were dealt with just like the Cathari, who were separated by a broad gulf from Catholics. Innocent III declared the mere refusal to swear, and the opinion that oaths were unlawful, a heresy worthy of death, and directed that whoever differed in any respect from the common way of life of the multitude should be treated as a heretic. Both the initiation and carrying out of this new principle must be ascribed to the popes alone. There was nothing in the literature of the time to pave the way for it. It was not till the practice had been systematized and carried out in many places that scholastic theology undertook its justification. Footnote 2. Thus St. Thomas tries to prove from the symbolic names given them in Scripture that heretics should be put to death. Thus, e.g., heretics are called thieves and wolves, but we hang thieves and kill wolves. Again, he calls heretics sons of Satan, and thinks they should share even on earth the fate of their father, i.e., be burnt. He observes, on the apostles saying that a heretic is to be avoided after 2 admonitions, that this avoidance is best accomplished by executing him. For the relapsed he thinks all instruction is useless, and they should be at once burnt. The episcopal and papal inquisitions were the first but certainly not the last of them. They were followed by the start of the infamous Spanish Inquisition in 1478, the Portuguese Inquisition in 1536 AD, the Roman Inquisition in 1542 AD, the Venetian Inquisition in 1547, and the Goa Inquisition in 1560. The Spanish Inquisition, most do not realize, extended beyond the borders of Spain to other European territories, including the Netherlands and Sicily, as well as to Spain's colonies in the Americas, and did not end in Europe until it was suppressed by the government of Spain in 1834. It is remarkable how closely the starting years of the 2 initial inquisitions coincided with the midpoint of the 1260-year epoch of papal supremacy, reckoned according to its starting years discussed previously. More precisely, when the 1260-year period is counted from 529 or 538 AD, the Episcopal Inquisition is seen as having begun very near its midpoint. When this period is counted from 606 AD, the Papal Inquisition is seen as having begun at its midpoint. This is visually illustrated in the 3 diagrams below. This is not the result of random coincidence, and it signifies several things at once. Marking the midpoint of a span of space or time is the simplest way of unambiguously indicating the whole span. Moreover, any meaning intrinsic to the indicator itself implies that the span that it marks is distinguished by, or subjected to, that meaning. In this context, the indicator is the year when the Inquisition began. The meaning of this indicator can be simplified to the start of intense religious persecution by the Roman Papacy. This aligns with the understanding that the entire prophesied span of 1260 years is a period of religious persecution instigated by the papacy. Therefore, the centrality of this indicator along the time span tends to confirm that the identified pair of year numbers does demarcate the prophesied 1260-year period. Likewise, the year-day principle upon which this time span is identified is also validated. In another sense, as this time span of the papacy begins with a waxing and ends with a waning of its influence over earthly affairs, it can naturally be envisaged like the arc of the sun. The sun, when exalted to its extreme, through the expression of its full power manifests its true nature.